Stephen, we're here in New York, this Canelo versus Charlo press conference, but I got to ask you, just have you heard from Errol at all? How is he, and what have you heard from the team about his status right now?
Well, Errol's been consistent. Like, he wants the rematch. He said it right after the fight, and he hasn't changed. There are a lot of conversations going on internally with his team. Some I'm privy to, some I'm not. But I wouldn't really want to disclose all of those. But the question is really what's best for his health. What's best for sort of his future. Is it a weight issue at 147? Is 54 right for him? Are there lingering effects, from the eye or the car accident? All those things are fair questions. He's been through a lot. So I think, I think all of that is still to be determined. But the one thing that is absolutely the case is, Spence wants the rematch. The question is as a team, do all his advisors agree that that's the best way to go?
Now, maybe you're more privy to this. Like, a lot of people have suggested maybe a test fight at 54, then go into the rematch. The way the contract is, like, does he have to go into an immediate rematch, or he can have like not a tune-up, but like a test fight before he goes into that?
It's an immediate rematch.
Yeah. So it has to, like the next fight, it has to be Crawford.
It have to be, but there's always negotiations. And the reality is, it is a big fight. It's the biggest fight, arguably, for either one of them right now. So, I'm not sure I haven't obviously spoken to Crawford about it. But if he had to wait a fight, and then get a big rematch, I don't see why that would be a big problem. So I don't think if he wanted to test himself at 47, I don't think that means that there won't be a rematch. It just means there has to be some negotiating.
December, is that still the tentative plan when you last spoke to everyone?
It hasn't, haven't really talked about the timetable. I mean, that's the timetable that's in the contract for the rematch. But again, I think there's flexibility, both ways.
Is there any way the rematch doesn't happen? Like, is it possible?
Sure. There's a couple different ways. I mean, Errol could decide he wants to go to 54, and Crawford decides, he doesn't want to go to 54. That's certainly an option. Or Crawford or Spence could decide that he wants a fight, like you suggested, 54 in between. Or it could be, Spence could decide he decides he wants a little bit of time off. So, the reality is there is some flexibility there, but I think given that it's a big fight, if both sides want it, there's going to be a way to overcome all the details.
Could you clear up any of the figures that were floating around? Are they accurate or are they inaccurate about the pay-per-views?
The pay-per-views? Yeah. We don't typically get into specifics, but I think most of the numbers that I've seen, are in the ballpark. I mean, there's the stray, the stray ones that say, it was an absolute flop. Certainly wasn't a flop. It hit right in the range of what we sort of expected. And look, it's going to be career high paydays by a multiple for each of those guys.
Yeah, no, it's overall, I felt it was a fight that it crossed to mainstream culture. That's for sure. So if Spence chooses not to do the immediate rematch, this is just kind of thinking, where does Boots kind of sit in that conversation then?
Well, it's sort of up to Crawford. I mean, he's been talking a lot about Jamel. It seems like he might wait for Jamel to get through the Canelo fight, see what happens. But I think, look, anything's possible. Like, there are good fights for him at 47. There's good fights at 54. And, I don't think anyone has really spent a lot of time, outside of his own internal team, talking to him, because it all depends on what happens with the rematch and whether he'll have some flexibility to do other stuff or not.
Is it more likely we see Boots and Stanionis? Has there been conversations about that, or is Boots kind of waiting for this Crawford fight too?
Boots would obviously love the Crawford fight, but failing that, he would love to see a title fight of any kind. So if, I know he would lean on the IBF and try to get the mandatory enforced. Failing that, look, there's Thurman, there's Stanionis, there's Crowley, there's some really good fights. But I think Boots' number one priority is to get a title shot.
When you look at just how this pay-per-view did, and given it was one-sided. What would be the challenge there? I would think like people for the rematch would be like, oh, like look what happened in the first one. Like, how would you guys approach pushing the rematch?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question, but I think, look, anybody who's followed Spence's career looks at that and is surprised at the result. I mean, I'm not surprised that Crawford won. It's a 50-50 fight. Either guy, could have won. But I think most people were surprised at the nature of it, that it was that one-sided. So I think there is interest in saying, was that an off night? Is Crawford really that good? Is weight a factor? I think there are a lot of questions. None of that is to take away anything from Crawford because he was spectacular that night. The question is, if that was an off night for Spence, is a rematch, does it look any different?
Crawford and Charlo, I want to see it. A lot of people want to see it, but realistically, timeline, like when would it happen? I would think like maybe a year and a half, right?
No, it could happen theoretically after the Canelo fight. Yeah. So you get through the Canelo fight, and so maybe it's first or second quarter of next year.
All right, Stephen, thank you. Appreciate it, my man.
You got it.